Okay, so I'm going to begin again. Hello and welcome to the climate change lesson number 4 the course. And today we're talking about climate change on both the international scale and the national scale. And like I mentioned, we're going to have the second part by our official from the Copperbelt University. His name is Jonathan, and I'm sure he's going to join in, or I think he's already joined in, or he's going to join in with time. Okay, so let me just share my presentation and then we can quickly begin. At the end, we're going to have a short quiz, okay? So I hope you familiarize yourselves with WooClub, yes. Okay, give me a second here. Okay. Just give me a second, I'm having difficulties sharing. Can somebody confirm if you can see the full screen? Can you see the full screen, or can you see? Somebody confirm, somebody, anyone? Okay.
Our body is not naturally. Yeah, we're able to see the full screen.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. Okay, let me share this again. Okay, so climate change on the international scale. I noticed from some of the people, you actually wrote very good assignments, and I was reading through them and I found out that most of you actually spoke about things like the IPCC, you spoke about the COP, the COP, and different other organizations that work on a global scale with climate change. And so we're going to talk a bit about that today. So let's get right into it. Climate change on the international scale. What are the learning outcomes for today? And let me just remind you, if you have any questions, you can feel free to use the chat box. I have another device here connected, so I'm going to be able to see your remarks and your questions. Now, our learning outcomes for today are only 4, okay? And we won't spend too much time. Number 1, we want to understand the COP, understanding the COP, understanding the IPCC, understanding global trends, and finally, a few key definitions and facts from what we've learned so far throughout this lesson, this course. Okay. Now, are you still able to see my screen change? Are you able to see my screen change?
Yeah, sure. We're able to see the change, everything. Okay. We're able to see everything.
Okay, thank you. I was doubting myself because on my other device it wasn't changing. But anyways, so COP, what is the COP? We may or may not have heard about the COP. Now the COP basically stands for the Conference of the Parties. Conference of the Parties, and it's under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the UN FCCC. Now, why is COP or COP important? It's important because this is a conference that takes place usually after 5 years, and it started in 2015. And it's the only conference that actually brings together representatives from almost all countries in the world to specifically discuss climate change as a global threat and the solutions and how it can be dealt with, okay? And so COP simply stands for Conference of the Parties, parties being the member countries, okay? Member countries, and it's under the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, UNFCCC. So we begin with what is called COP21. Now, COP21 simply means the conference. It was the 21st session of the conference, and it was held in 2015. And you may have heard as well about the famous Paris Agreement, okay, Paris Agreement, to which over 190 countries signed to be a part of it. Well, the Paris Agreement actually happened at COP21 in France, okay? So at the Conference of the Parties in 2015 in France, they made the Paris Agreement. Now, what was this Paris Agreement? The Paris Agreement was simply, it's important because it was for the first time ever, countries agreed to work together in order to limit global warming to below 2 degrees before the mid-century, which is 2050. Okay, now this is interesting because we have known about climate change from the late 1900s, but the very first conference took place in 2015. Okay, and so this is why the Paris Agreement is important. This is why it is also famous. And so the commitment to aim for 1.5 degrees, that means that the Earth, the average temperature of the Earth should be limited to an increase of 1.5 degrees with reference to the pre-industrial levels. So that means if we reference it back to the average temperatures before any kind of man-made infrastructure, before any kind of man-made industrialization, machines and power plants and all of these things, the average temperature then, let us try to limit the increase to 1.5. And you might think 1.5 is a small number or 2 is a small number, but it could have devastating effects. And we're going to see this in a later part of today's lecture. Now, the commitment that each member party had to make at the Paris 2015 was what they call nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. So every member country was required to draft up a plan of how they were going to target or how they were going to meet the goals for the Paris Agreement, meaning what policies were they going to put in place so as to not have an increase of temperature more than 1.5, preferably, or at most 2 degrees by the mid-century, meaning by 2050. Okay. And so Paris 2015 happened. Paris 2015 happened. And the interesting thing about these climate change negotiations is that they're not only scientific, but they are much more political. You find that from the scientific and engineering point of view, most of the solutions are there, but the political will is what is lacking. And so even when you go to conventions like this, for example, the COP, it is more a political convention than it is a scientific convention, because you've got heads of state or you've got ministers from different countries, and each one is looking for their own good. You've got countries that produce more greenhouse gases that are doing more damage than others, you see? And so there's a lot of politics that goes in. And so there's this funny caricature here where it says, there is a unanimous agreement amongst world leaders that every country, apart from their own, needs to do much more to save the planet, you see? So there's sort of a blame game that happens. The Paris Agreement, the commitments laid out in this agreement, they don't come close to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And the window for achieving this is closing. So this is 2015, the Paris Agreement is made. Okay, by 2030, sorry, I was saying 2050, by 2030, we have to limit the warming to 1.5. But in actual sense, these things are not happening because member countries, especially those that produce the most greenhouse gases, they don't want to change to other sources of energy, or they don't want to change the way they do things, basically. And this was becoming a problem because the damage is becoming worse, but yet countries are not sticking to what they promised during the Paris Agreement. And so there was need to have another convention of the parties, which is what they call, which is COP 2016. I've been talking about COP 21, meaning the 21st session, so to say, 21st session. It was the one in 2015. Now, we recently had another one. Some of you might have been paying close attention to the news. In end of October, towards the beginning of November, up to, I think, November 12th, we had another one, the COP 26. Again, a conference of the parties summit. This one was in Glasgow in the UK. And so the COP 2016 summit brought parties together to accelerate action towards the goals of the what? The first one, the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it was due to take place it was supposed to take place in Glasgow, November 2020, but because of the pandemic, it was changed and it took place this year in 2021. And it was something that was big. So what are some of the goals of this COP26 that took place in 2021? Remember, we're trying to see things from the international scale, right? Trying to see climate change from the international scale and how it is dealt with. If you have any questions, feel free to text them or send them at any time. And so the goals of the COP26 are as follows. Now, first, you need to understand climate negotiations are very complex, again, because they are political. You know, the thing is that some of you, I was reading from some assignments, people are saying, no, we can just cut away from using fossil fuels and using methane, natural gas, and coal. But the truth is, it isn't very easy. It's quite expensive. If you look at renewable energies, how unstable they are, how expensive they are, and how the yield is. So for example, if you use solar panels, only 15%, less than 15% of the energy that it receives is being converted, is actually useful, you see? And so you require a large scale solar power plant just to produce the energy that a small coal plant can produce, you understand? And so this is why the politics come in. You say, I should invest. And so this is why the politics come in. You say, I should invest. I can hear some background noise. Okay, I should invest in this. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so saying I should invest in these things that are new, that are unstable, that only work when the sun is there. Then now you need batteries to store the power and all this. Let me just continue with coal. We have got a lot of experience with coal. We know exactly how it works. We know exactly how much percentage of power we can get from it. Why not just continue with it? You see, most of those nice cars, most of those nice buildings, most of the nice things that we see in these developed countries, it is because they use these same fuels that are damaging to the environment. And so other countries will say, no, us, we're a poor country. Why should you force us to make solutions for things that we're not a part of? Zambia, for example, has got 95% hydroelectric power. You know, most of it is clean. Why should we pay for countries like Italy or countries like Algeria that use gas, that use coal? You know, so those are the kind of politics that come into play. I don't want to enter into the political circle, but I'm just trying to give you an idea that it's not only a scientific battle, it's also a political battle as well. And so these conventions are usually very, very tense. Okay, so we're going to continue here. So what were the goals of the COP26, the one that happened very recently in 2021? So the goal was to secure a global net zero by mid-century and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. What does this mean? Excuse me. So what this means is that a global net zero, what does this mean? It means we need to get to a stage by 2050 where the amount of carbon we release into the atmosphere is equal to the amount that is being taken in. Remember, we had talked about carbon sinks, right? Things like planting trees. There's also now artificial carbon sinks where there are technologies that collect carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and take it into the ground. Okay, and so the goal of this COP26, which was more, I would say, more strict on the countries, on the member countries, is to achieve a net zero, meaning yes, we'll continue producing, but we need to find ways to reduce as well so that we have a balance, so to say. We don't have any more new carbon going into the atmosphere. And so part of doing this would be what? Would be one, accelerate the phase out of coal. Again, coal is one of the major contributors. That's why I speak a lot about coal, basically because of that. But of course, there's other contributors. We need to curtail deforestation, speed up the switch to electric vehicles, and not only electric vehicles, but electric vehicles that are using clean energy. because what's the point of making an electric vehicle and then you charge it with power from a coal-fired solar plant, from a coal power plant, or from a liquid nitrogen gas, or what's some other kind of fossil fuel power plant? It's the same difference, you understand? And so speed up the switch to both electric vehicles and power as well, clean power. And then finally, encourage investment in renewables. Now, this is a financial aspect of it, because businessmen, they also want things that are stable, things that are promising. And that's the thing with coal and with all these other fossil fuels, that they are very promising. We already know how they work. They're easy to predict. And so people easily invest in projects like that. Okay, but anyways, these were sort of the goals, and I'm just summarizing because we can't get into everything. Let's talk a bit about coal. Let's talk a bit about accelerating the phase out of coal. More than 40 countries actually agreed to phase out coal totally, meaning they would no longer sign new contracts to build coal-powered plants. Okay, so that's a good thing. Many major international banks also committed to ending international public financing of new coal power by the end of 2021. Okay, and then some of the largest coal producers again were absent from this agreement. So now here's the political part, because you find that China, for example, and America and India, these are the countries that produce a lot more of this waste, but then they themselves did not sign to let's say, did not pledge themselves to phase out coal, you see? So again, these are political problems that come in on the international scale. So let's see. Responding to calls to phase out and fossil fuel subsidies, India's climate minister said his country still has to deal with their development agendas and poverty eradication. So again, this is what India had to say. India is one of the largest, about 8% of coal is produced in India, right? And so they said, we have to deal with our developmental agendas and poverty eradication first. In short, it's a bigger problem that we deal with poverty. And so we cannot start investing in other new technologies, like solar. We are not even sure, how stable they are, how the technology is and things like that. And so this is sort of what goes on at these meetings. So here's just a graph that is showing you the percentage. So you can see, let me see, do I have the pointer thingy? The pointer. Okay, I think it's this one. Yeah, so you can see here that we have China over 40. This is one country, okay, 45% of coal production. You've got the United States, you've got India, Australia, and you've got is it Indonesia? Indonesia with 5%. And then the rest of the world, which is more than 200 countries, is in the 23%. Okay, so you can see where problems would arise from this. Let's move on quickly here. So what has your country pledged at COP26? I figured this would be interesting for you guys. Countries made pledges at the COP26, and I added Algeria and Italy because it's interesting to me. So you've got, for example, Algeria, they have said ending deforestation, that is a no for them. Net zero targets, they haven't set any targets by 2050. Quitting coal, no. Cut methane emissions, no. You see, you've got countries like Israel who have pledged yes, yes, yes. And of course, as Zambia, we have pledged. For us, it won't be a very big problem. We don't have that much coal in use. And so it won't be a big problem, I guess, for us. But there are countries where it's going to be a problem, like Algeria again. Algeria, as you know, the large part of it is a desert. And you might say, it's a desert, they receive a lot of sunlight. Okay, let's just put a lot of solar panels there and let them stay, and that's going to produce a lot of electricity. But then the thing is that those solar panels, they work because of light. Okay, they convert light into electricity and not heat. In the deserts there, you've got both light and heat. The hotter it gets, the less efficient solar panels are. And so they also have sort of that problem to deal with as a country. Because if it gets too hot, even if there's a lot of sunlight, the solar panels are not going to work well. Anyways, let's look at now the IPCC. So we've talked a bit about the COP, and these are just small things. Like these are just summaries. I'm not really going too much into detail. I know that you can just Google these things and find them anywhere. So the IPCC, who are the IPCC? The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, right? Now, what you're looking at right now is a report. I read in one assignment, somebody mentioned the IPCC report. This is it. It's a large book, about 3,000 pages. If you have a lot of time, you can read it. So yeah, the IPCC is also under the United Nations. It's the body that assesses the science related to climate change. So it's different because it's not a political organization, or it's not politicians. It is scientists who are basically doing research and bringing results. What the politicians decide to do with the results, that's up to them. As for them, they just bring the factual data, right? And so that is the IPCC. So the IPCC as well, they had their report in 2021, which is this year. 2020 was still in 2021. So they had their report. What were their main findings? Some of the main findings were that we are set to pass 1.5 warming by 2040. Remember, the Paris Agreement was that we must get up to 1.5 by 2030, right? But then we're saying by 2050, mid-century. But now we are saying 2040, according to the actual data, if we don't change the course at which we are moving, we'll be able to hit these temperatures at in 2040 instead of 2050. And you're going to see the effects on this. I know right now it seems a little vague. You might not know, okay, so what? It's just 1.5, but you're going to see what this means. These are reports that came from the IPCC themselves. Now they're saying human activity is driving extreme weather. I know that you know this, but in the scientific realms, it was still something that was very much disputed. In fact, I had one professor who gave us a lecture on how he doesn't believe climate change is a problem, you know. And so there are still academics who did not believe in this, or who do not believe that climate change is actually, that human activity is what's causing climate change. There are some who believe that it's a natural phenomenon and climate change has been changing throughout, okay? But then what this report is showing us, unequivocal, you see the word there, unequivocal, meaning without doubt that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, the ocean and the land. This is what the report concludes. So the IPCC also, the third thing is that we know more about the regional climate impacts, meaning we have been able to develop models or simulations, better simulations about our climate and how it's changing. And so now we know more about what could happen with a bit more precision, so to say, just to simplify. And then you've got number 4, we are getting closer to irreversible tipping points. Carbon sinks become less effective. What does this mean? This is important because it means we're getting to a point, if we don't change, if nothing changes, okay, we are getting to a point where it becomes irreversible. The damage that is done becomes irreversible. And the thing is that the hotter that the Earth becomes, the less efficient the carbon sinks become. So just a reminder, carbon sinks are things like trees that absorb the oxygen, things like ice, glaciers, things like glaciers in the North and the South Pole that reflect light. That also helps a lot in removing some of that excess heat. Those are also carbon sinks. And so what they're saying is that the hotter it becomes, the less effective these are. Because the hotter it becomes, for example, the glaciers begin to melt, meaning you've got less ice, white ice, you've got less white ice to reflect heat back into space. It means that you've got more water, has got already a lot of heat content. And if you remember some of your thermodynamics, if the water is already at a temperature, how do I explain this? If the temperature difference, okay, between the atmosphere and the water is less, meaning you've got it can't absorb as much. So the basic point here being that it becomes harder to solve it the worse it becomes. even the carbon sinks become less effective. And so this latest report simply shows that these effects that we've been talking about, you've been hearing about, they're going to happen earlier and more severe than we first thought. And the confidence levels have increased, meaning this report now uses language like virtually certain, high confidence, it's extremely likely. These are terms that were not in the previous reports, but this report that came out this year shows that the confidence has increased in climate and all of that. Okay, so moving quickly here, have a few minutes and we're going to enter into the next session. We've got understanding global trends. Understanding global trends. Now, this is basically a graph on the evolution of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's not important that you know everything that's going on here, but basically that here you've got the units of carbon dioxide on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, you've got years or time. And so you can see that you've got sort of this up and down movement, right? Which seems like a cycle. So you've got, it goes up, the climate naturally changes itself. But what happens when you get, and it looks consistent from throughout, if you can see, it looks consistent from throughout. But when you get towards the 1950 level, what happened? It breaks that barrier, breaks that barrier. For some of you who do Forex trading, I'm sure this looks very familiar. It breaks that barrier, right? And just look at how it grows so exponentially there, just towards the end. And yet there are still people who say that, no, this is climate change that's happening now particularly, is just a natural phenomenon. It really isn't. It really isn't. Yeah, and so let's move quickly here. Global warming now, that was carbon dioxide. This is temperatures. Again, we see a similar sort of movement. You see from the 1880s, the 1900s, 1920s, you've got sort of a consistent around that. That is what we take as the zero, okay? As the zero. So when you talk about average, we're talking about average temperature of the whole Earth, okay? Of the whole Earth. We know that during a day, temperatures fluctuate, right? We're not talking about daily fluctuations of temperatures. No, today it was 30 degrees, tomorrow it was what? No, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about average over the whole Earth. Okay, this is why it's important. Because an average increase of 1.5, maybe in Zambia, it might be very small, us who are around the equator there, it might be a very small change. But in the North Poles, in the South Poles, in other extremities of the Earth, the 1.5 degrees translates into a very large temperature difference. So these are averages, okay? I don't want to get too much into the mathematics of it. I don't want to bore you. But anyways, we have let's say we've got 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees. 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees. Sea level rise, what would happen? Okay, so if we let the climate get to 1.5 degrees above the reference period, we would have sea level rise of about 77 centimeters, especially in the north and southern poles. So the ice there would melt and the sea level would rise about 77 centimeters. That is a high distance to rise, Now, I don't know, 77, that's close to a meter of sea level rise, okay? Now, if that was at 2 degrees, just a difference of 0.5 degrees, we would have what? 87 centimeters, an additional 10 centimeters. Now, at 1.5, it means about 69 million people would be affected, meaning taking into account the people right now who live in coastal areas, okay? If we get to 1.5, what would happen? 69 million of those people would be affected and wouldn't be able to live there anymore. Now that becomes a social economic problem because now they become refugees and now there's all sorts of problems that arise. But if we go to 2 degrees, what do we have? We have 80 million. So the point, if you don't get everything that I'm trying to say, the point I'm trying to make is that a very small change in the temperature could mean a lot. A very small change in the temperature could mean a lot, okay? All right. So we're going to move on. And it is the same with the heat waves. We're going to look at this later on. It's the same with coral reefs. At 1.5, you've got 70 to 90% that would die, coral reefs, and at 2 degrees, over 99%. That is a lot. And now you've got coral reefs dead. That's a serious ecological problem. Okay. And so I have attached here, the reason I'm presenting these things again is not to paralyze you with fear or anxiety, but it's just to give us that extra motivation and that extra passion to say, to bring us all into high gear, to ensure that we can take action, in whatever we do. And we're not talking about solutions right now. We're going to have the last lecture that's going to talk about that, but it's just sort of to give you an idea. Everyone has got the power to change our own emissions path and hence make a contribution to a bigger picture. But we also have powers to demand systemic change. Okay, I have attached 1.5. What is this? Oh, this is a video that I found interesting that describes just how important an average change of 1.5 degrees would be. Okay, and so with that said and done, we have our WUCLAP quiz. We're not going to do it now. We're going to do it after the second presenter, okay? Because we need to get into that. And then that's that. So if you have any questions, again, right now, I'm going to stop sharing this. Okay, so with that said and done, that has been climate change on the international scale. And now I'm going to get to Mr. Jonathan. Just check if Jonathan is in. Now, again, I mentioned Jonathan is the president for the environmental. Let me just check it so that I can say it very correctly. Okay, I did send you his bio, and so I'm sure you've seen that. But he is the president for the Copperbelt University Natural Resources and Environmental Society, and he's going to be giving us his own ideas as well. And I'm really excited to learn from him. Jonathan, are you with us at the moment?
Yes, I am, Gonzo. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, perfect. And so, yeah, the floor is yours right now, Jonathan. You can just take it up.
All right. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all fine and having a great time, even as we're in the last day of the year. Ngosa, I would like to share my screen, so I don't know if it's possible I can be made like a co-host.
Yes, definitely. Let me do that right now. Just give me a second. Okay, you should be able to share now.
Okay.
Okay. Is it okay?
Yes, I'm just doing it right now.
Okay, perfect. So again, I'll remind you guys, if you have any questions, if you have any contributions, you can use the chat.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Like I said, thank you so much for according me this opportunity. My name is Jonathan Phiri. I'm a BSc student from the Copperbelt University. I'm doing sustainable natural resource management and climate. Um, so I was basically invited to just give a short talk on the climate change on the international and national scale. But I can see Ngosa has done a very great job talking about it on the international scale. So I'll just concentrate a bit much more on Zambia and talk a little bit about how climate change has affected us and what we can do to try to ensure that we try to reach targets as net zero by 2030 and 2060. So Ngosa really has set the foundation for me. So really he's made my work a lot easy, So I'm basically just going to talk about what we as a country can do and how we can, try to prepare ourselves towards the many effects of climate change. Just a second, let me just. My apologies. I'm just having an issue with my camera. Okay, so I'm just gonna turn my camera off because it somehow affects the transmission for the whole stream. Hope that's okay.
Okay, that's all right.
Awesome. So yeah, what we can see here is the Earth on a cone of ice cream, and as we can see, it's melting as a result of the impacts of climate change. We have and global warming. So Zambia, I believe we all know where Zambia is located, and when you look at Zambia's climatic characteristics, Zambia is a tropical country. It's located in the southern part of the world, of the hemisphere. I mean, so due to the fact that Zambia is located close to the equator, we somehow share certain characteristics such as uh, hot weather. We don't have rain throughout, but we have a relatively cool weather throughout the year. So we have seasons where we have got very hot temperatures, and sometimes it goes to as much as 35 degrees Celsius. We have dry season, which is basically from somewhere September to November, and the coolest years of the month, June, July, when we have our winter there, and sometimes the temperatures go down to about 15 degrees Celsius. So in terms of climate, Zambia basically is divided into three zones, and these sometimes are called the Zambian climatic zones, or the rainfall zones that we have, which is zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. So these zones are basically divided or are distinguished based on the amount of rainfall each zone receives. So zone 1 basically is those parts in the southern province of the country down there, and these countries or these areas are in zone 1 receive an annual amount of 600 millimeters of rainfall every year. So we have zone 2 places in zone 2. We have places like Lusaka, Kavwe, all the way to Chipata somewhere there. So these areas that lie along the zone 2 belt receive about 800 to 1000 millimeters. So if you look at zone 2, this is actually where a lot of our agricultural activities. This is where we have the farms. Talk about Mukushi, talk about Kapiri, Kavwe, all the way to Chipata there. This is where a lot of farming activities take place, basically because of the favorable, conditions. I mean, 800 to 100 millimeters of rainfall is normally good for most crops that we grow in the country. And that is the reason why you find that along this place, we have so many farms, we have so many agricultural activities taking place. So the third zone, which is zone 3, this is where you find places like the Copperbelt, Munilunga up top, Nakonde there, Kasama. So these places receive a whole lot of rainfall. So we are talking about above 1,200 millimeters of rainfall, which may sound like a good thing, but for some crops, this leads to issues like waterlogging and whatnot. So yes, we have places like Minulunga where we grow a lot of pineapples. We have places in the Copperbelt like Lufanyama where there's a lot of farming that takes place. But Region 3 receives the highest amount of rainfall, also attributed to the fact that Region 3 is closest to the equator. So basically, the higher we go, the more amount of rainfall each region receives. So I'm going to talk about greenhouse gases, deforestation, and degradation. So according to the World Resource Institute, it was estimated that the amount of emissions dropped by almost 18% between the year 1990 and 2010. So by emissions here, I'm talking about greenhouse gas emissions. So we have gases like carbon dioxide, which happens to be the major greenhouse gas. That is actually it is the first contributor of climate change. We also have greenhouse gases like methane, we have chlorocarbons, we have ozone, we have water vapor. So now these greenhouse gases drop mainly because of land changes. So looking at Zambia, you find that the major reason for climate change in this country is deforestation. Unlike most Western countries where they have high levels of industrialization, they have everything is almost automated. They have got speed, these high speed trains and whatnot. For us, one of the reasons why we are having this, one of the reasons why we are feeling this impacts of climate change is because of deforestation. So yes, we have little industrialization in the country. We are still growing. We are a third world country. We are developing. But the issue is we have one of the highest rates of deforestation in the world. And this is attributed to the fact that most of the people in Zambia, that is both in urban and rural areas, depend heavily on charcoal. So what this means is that we are cutting so much trees for us to consume, to cook, to warm. Those of us who have chickens, we get the charcoal, we use it to warm our chickens in the winter at night and all that. So for us, deforestation is one of the major issues that really is affecting us and affecting a lot of issues in the country. So now the highest causes of emissions, like I said, is agriculture, land use change, waste, and the energy sectors. So agriculture. Um, Zambia has so many small scale farmers, and these actually are the main, more actually, they account for the majority of farmers in the country. So now, in as much as they are small scale farmers, but activities just like keeping cattle, keeping cows, cows themselves emit a certain amount of methane in the air. So small amounts of greenhouse gases are emitted in these activities. Talk about driving a tractor. If I have a farm and I'm maybe growing maize, okay, maybe on a 2 hectares or a 2 hectare piece of land. So now my tractor there will have to run on diesel. It will have to run on diesel. And by doing so, combustion is taking place. Carbon monoxide is being emitted into the atmosphere. So all these little activities that take place in the whole farming value chain, starting from the production of seed, the transportation, the processing, the greenhouse gases that are emitted almost at every stage. So like I said, land change use, this basically is a change of use. So like I said, I'll give an example where we find an area where there's a lot of trees, it's untouched virgin land. Okay, so I cut down the trees. I now build a farm there. Maybe I build a housing complex or whatnot. So that basically is land change use. So I've changed its initial use from being a forested area into now maybe being a farming plot or a residential area. So now, Zambia's climate change policy recognizes that deforestation rates are high. So it has been estimated that between 250,000 to 300,000 hectares per annum amount of hectares are actually lost towards deforestation. So like I just earlier said, deforestation, yes, is the major reason that we are having climate change, and so many trees are cut down, and this really has a very great effect on our country in so many areas, which I will talk about into the next slide. So I've listed a few um, I already talked about them, but I just listed a few um, issues that actually accelerate or greatly increase the impact of climate change. So we talk about charcoal and firewood consumption. I talked about how so many people heavily depend on charcoal and firewood consumption. Timber production in Zambia, we have the famous Mukula and Mopa trees. So these trees, yes, quite alright, they may catch very good prices abroad, and they're being exported to China and Vietnam for so many users. They have got very good, medicinal purposes. But the fact is, the rate at which we are cutting them and we are exploiting them, it far exceeds the rate at which these trees are able to reproduce on themselves. So what this basically means is that the more we are producing timber, which is a good thing on the economy, but it's a bad thing on the environment, because now we are cutting down trees and we are destroying the water cycle. We are reducing the amount of greenhouse gas that can be. Ngozi earlier on talked about how trees are carbon sinks. So we are reducing the amount of carbon sinks that we have by excessive timber logging. So we also have unsustainable agriculture methods such as shift cultivation. If if you did geography, you remember there is that system that we learned, the shift cultivation system that we normally practice. The Chitemene system, yeah, where we get to mainly, I believe it's the Bembas who mainly practice this system, whereby we get to cut down trees, we burn the trees to make ash, which is somehow said to make the ground more fertile. When that is done, we plant the trees. It is a good system. It has been a system, sorry, that has been used for a very long time, but it has very adverse effects on the environment, because the trees are being cut, the trees are burnt, so many things come into place. So, and other land use practices. So deforestation and degradation and their impact to national greenhouse gas emissions. So really there is a difference between deforestation and degradation. So when I'm talking about deforestation, I mean the land change use of land from maybe a forested area to a completely different use. So I go and cut down trees in an area, like I said earlier on, I build a house. Or maybe I cut down trees or virgin land, I build a farm. So now what I'm doing there is I'm causing deforestation. So when we talk about degradation, this is when we go to an area, we may cut down trees and disturb the area, disturb the ecosystems and the habitats there. But degradation mainly talks about reducing the quality or reducing the amount of ecosystem services that that piece of land uh, was doing. So if I cut down trees, which means that now I'm reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that can be absorbed by these trees. So that's now degradation. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh, and before I quickly go on, this is not supposed to be a lecture. So if you have any question, please feel free to ask. I'll be more than willing to answer. Okay, so we have Red Plus. So this basically is just a follow up on the degradation and deforestation. So Red Plus are initiatives that basically stand for the reduction of emissions through deforestation and forest degradation. So like I said, in Zambia and many sub-Saharan African countries, the major reasons and the major causes of climate change in our countries is deforestation. It's not industrialization, because a lot of our African countries really are developing countries. We have a few exceptions, like let me say South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria, which really are doing well, but still more even these countries, they're also lagging in certain aspects. So now when we look at deforestation, a lot of us cut down trees for consumption. We cut down trees for selling for charcoal. We use it firewood in the rural areas. We use firewood for cooking, and some people use trees for building houses and all these other things, construction. So now Red Plus basically advocates for us to reduce deforestation, us to reduce forest degradation by using mechanisms that we can manage. So now currently, the reason why we advocate for tree planting is because at the moment, it's one of the most viable and it's the most viable mechanism that we can manage to do because we have other mechanisms such as direct air capture, post-combustion air capture. So these are technologies that try by all means to remove, they try to suck carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So let's say imagine a sink, the way a sink where bathtub works, right? When you open the sink, I mean the tap, water flows down in the sink and it flows down the drain. So now imagine carbon dioxide in the atmosphere passing through that sink, going down the drain and being collected for other use. So that's what basically these technologies are trying to do. They're trying to directly capture carbon dioxide from the air. And why carbon dioxide? You remember, if you remember, I mentioned that carbon dioxide is the major greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change because of its properties. It is one of the gases that really causes what we call the greenhouse gas effect. And as a result, it is a major gas that you hear people talking about because when you talk about when you talk about carbon dioxide, climate change is always normally lingering just somewhere nearby. So these technologies are just basically trying to see how we can reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We are trying to see how we can reduce the effect rather that greenhouse gas emissions have in the atmosphere. So like I said, tree planting is the most viable mechanism right now. So the more trees we plant, believe in me, the closer we get towards reducing the impact of climate change. So there is more that needs to be done, but I believe that starting is the most important thing. So planting trees is the most viable thing at the moment. So this is a quote by Paul Pullman, one of the CEOs for Unilever. So he said that the biggest risk of growth is climate change. And I happen to believe that this is true because a lot of African countries, really, Zambia inclusive, are vulnerable. So climate change affects so many industries. Talk about agriculture, energy, health, infrastructure. Believe it, it's going to affect us one way or the other. So for us, really, we are so vulnerable, and there is so much that needs to be done. If you look at what's happening across the globe, we hear of tornadoes and hurricanes, the West, earthquakes and whatnot. But once a climatic disaster hits any African country, I don't know, but the effects are accelerated. And one of the reasons is that once that happens, when you talk about resources, because I talked about how it's a bit political, but now when you imagine a scenario where a climatic disaster hits any African country, which maybe has so much debt, its infrastructure is bad, its services are poor, bad road infrastructure. How is this country going to try to help the people in need? How are they going to, relocate the people, provide food and shelter? So for us as African countries, really, any small change in climate, it really has a very great impact. So there really is much that we need to do for us to be safe and sound. So I'm going to just speedily go through the impacts of climate change on agriculture here in Zambia. So agriculture contributes for 20% of our GDP, and it accounts for a very large portion of our labor force. So a lot of people, like I said earlier on, are small scale farmers. So we heavily depend, not only are they small scale farmers, but they are also subsistence farmers. So they basically produce food for their own for their home consumption. So now you find that so many people are producing food just for themselves. So now what happens when we have a drought? What happens when we have floods? As of now, I believe a lot of you can testify to this, that we are having a dry spell in a lot of areas across the country. We are having, for like, we are having issues whereby it's not raining. I don't want to call it a drought as of yet, but we are having very, for lack of a better term, very tricky uh, rainfall patterns. So now, what is this going to mean for the small scale farmers that we have in the country? What is this going to mean for our economy as a country? Because this is not going to talk about, this is going to threaten our food security. So now, like I said, the impact on agriculture is very great because so many people depend on agriculture, not only for food, but also for employment. So like I said, it's got a 60% labor force, which means a lot of people are employed in the agriculture chain. So majority of the farmers, like I said, are small scale farmers, and they depend heavily on rainfall. Unlike commercial farmers who have, center pivots, they have got advanced irrigation, infrastructure on the farms and the like, they are safe. So even if there is a drought, they are able to secure themselves. But for most of the farmers who depend on the rain, when a drought comes, the crops are damaged. That basically means that they might have no food. That might lead to poverty. It will lead to theft. It could even lead to other issues such as rural to urban migration. And consequently, as a country, it will lead to low shortage of food, expensive prices, because now the laws of demand and supply will kick in. The less food you have in the country, the more expensive it is. So all these things really they add the compound effect of all these things really is drastic. So the agriculture sector in Zambia is very vulnerable to rainfall patterns, like I just said, and with time it has become very unpredictable because of climate change. You see, so rainfall in most parts of the country was beginning on the 20th of December, somewhere there, when most farmers were expecting it to come maybe in November, somewhere there. So with time, really, because I happen to believe that the impacts that we are actually facing right now are not even those that we did, you know, because what we are doing, the cutting down of trees, we are becoming advanced every time. The more we advance, the more natural resources we use, the more the impact of climate change. So now, climate change also impacts us on the health part because a large population, a large number of people in Zambia really already do not have access to, good health services and sanitation and the like. So now what climate change basically does, it accelerates, for instance, high temperatures in certain areas. The high temperatures may lead to the breeding of more mosquitoes, or it may lead to locusts, armyworms, or other insects that can be pests, and these can also be vectors and carry on certain diseases that may be transmitted to people. So now, climate change climate changes are predicted to increase mortality levels associated with climate-sensitive diseases. Like I said, I talk about malaria, and I'm talking about malaria because it's one of the diseases that really affects a lot of Zambians, and really it is a killer disease in the country. So once temperatures increase, once mosquitoes begin to breed, what we have is a large amount of malaria cases. And now, if you look at the situation in the rural areas whereby already they do not have enough health facilities to account for the people there. Now, what happens if we have a lot of cases on a daily basis going there for malaria? It may consequently lead to death of some people. So really, when you're talking about the health part, it is also affected. So climate change and energy. Zambia relies heavily on a climate sensitive source of energy, which is hydro. We use more than 80 or more than 70% of our power is actually generated from Lake Kariba. So Lake Kariba actually happens to be one of the largest man-made lakes, in the world. So despite its enormous size, really, the amount of energy that it generates for the country is not enough. So now, why am I talking about hydro? Hydro basically depends on the amount of water that we have in the dam. So if we, in this year, for instance, have a low amount of rainfall, that is going to directly mean that the Caribbean there will not have enough water to generate power. So when that happens, the result will be we might not have enough power in the country. So now that's going to lead to load shedding. That's going to lead to long hours of power cuts, directly leading to now high prices. I mean, right, it raises the price of goods and services because people now have to look for alternatives like gensets, generators and whatnot. So really, the energy sector, like I said, too, is also is also a victim of climate change. So in our country like Zambia, more needs to be done. We need to adapt other sources, renewable sources like solar. We have biodiesel. We have geothermal sources in the country. We have potential for even wind energy. So much more needs to be done because currently, really, our source of energy is not stable, and alternatives need to be found fast. So Ngosa talked about how the COP26, and I believe you talked about the previous arrangements, such as the Paris agreement that was signed in 2016. We have so many agreements that were signed by so many countries on how they can, set goals to reduce the amount of climate change. I mean, the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted and whatnot. So Zambia, too, as a nation, really has been putting in policies and trying to set goals to also make sure that it's not left, so we have certain policies and strategies such as the National Adaptation Plan for Action, which was made in 2007. We have the intended national determined contribution, which was formed in 2016. We have the National Climate Change Response Strategy that was signed in 2010. Sorry. Also, the National Policy on Climate Change, which was signed in 2016. So just like other countries in the world, really, Zambia really has also been trying to see how we can try to combat climate change, because setting a target and a goal is one thing, but we need objectives, we need policies. I can say that, okay, by 2030, we will have no climate change in the country. But if we don't do anything, that's not going to magically happen on its own. We need to start putting policies. Like I'll talk about a few policies in the next slide. So one of the things that really I believe that we should applaud and we should be glad about is recently, um, a new ministry, which is the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment, was formed. So this new ministry really is one that has come at a come so timely because initially it was just a department. If I'm not mistaken, it was under the Ministry of, if not planning or finance. So there was a climate change department in this ministry, but now it's been made the whole ministry, which is the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. So now what does this mean for the country? Number one, it means that we will have new commitments towards national climate change goals. So there'll be a revision of all strategies, and there'll be a way of them saying, okay, we tried out this policy back then. How can we make it more effective? We'll look back at our old policies and work on them and try to see how better we can, make sure that we also follow in the direction that the world is going. This year we had COP26, Zambia, our new minister was there, our Republican president was there. So we'll be saying, okay, now we have this new ministry. How can we follow the direction to which the world is going? So like new policies, like I earlier said, will be put in place. For instance, net metering. So net metering is it's a system or let's call it technology that, for example, I'll give this scenario whereby imagine you have a solar panel on your rooftop. So you have this solar panel and it's generating power for you. So now in other countries, especially most countries up north in Europe, I believe in Australia as well, they have a law which states if you have a solar panel on your roof, in the day it will generate power. But what happens if you generate more power and you happen to get more electricity than you normally consume? So what will happen is that, let me give figures here. For example, if you have an excess of 5 megawatts, right? What's going to happen? That 5 megawatts is going to be sent back into the grid. And by the grid, I mean, bringing it down to our local perspective, that 5 megawatts will be sent back into the ZESCO grid. Okay. So that 5 megawatts will be in the ZESCO grid. And then at a time where you will happen, maybe at night, or maybe in a day or 2 weeks after that, you happen to need power and you are low on electricity. So instead of you maybe going to buy units from ZESCO, that 5 megawatts that you had initially transmitted into the grid will be given back to you. You see. So this system really is a very good one because people are able to save on power. People will put in solar panels, people will generate more power, and the excess of this electricity will be sent into the grid. And then at a time when they would need the power, those units or that power will be sent back to them. So directly, that means that on the energy on my budget, the energy cost will be reducing because I'll be generating power. And if I am effective in the way I consume, in the way I use my appliances at home, which means that I will have some money saved on the power side. So like the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment also will also directly lead to more collaboration among public, private, and non-government organizations. Because you find that when we have these three operating in silos, there is no collaboration, no coordination. It's very much difficult because the public will be saying, we want to go this direction, the private sector will be going that other direction. But when we have harmony, when we have collaboration, when we have what we call PP, PPP, public and private partnership collaboration, it will be easy for all these three sectors to sit down together to make attainable goals and targets and to make sure that we as a country are following that direction, that we are also moving in the direction that we set. So the government, the private, the NGOs, through this new ministry, I believe we'll be seeing much more collaborations with the UN. Now we have GIZ, we have so many organizations, even so many organizations out there that are working on these issues. So this new ministry will ensure that we have much more collaboration and much more harmony and union towards combating climate change. Yes. So with the little that I've said, I would just like to say that honestly speaking, there is more that needs to be done. We as a country, and I always believe that there is something that can be done. It may look small. Ngosa earlier on talked about how people were saying that climate change is a natural phenomenon and whatnot. That okay, 1 degree won't mean anything. But honestly speaking, just single degree, a change in the average amount of climate of weather that of temperature that we have has drastic changes. So there is much that we can do. Planting a single tree, as little as it may seem, will have a great impact in the future. We might not see it now, but we just have to do these things. I always say that there are no borders in the air. So whatever happens in the West, in China, in America, whether we like it or not, is going to affect Zambia, Italy, is going to affect Brazil. So this is something that we all, as citizens of the world, have to try by all means possible to see what we can do, to collaborate more, to add more funding. Right now, I'm glad that the COP26, they're talking about how much more money is going to be put towards, trying to reduce the impacts of climate change in certain countries, which is a good thing. But, money alone won't do the issue. We need the money, yes, but we also need the people, the willingness. We need the young brains, such as yours and mine, to come together to see, okay, how can we work around this? What can we do? Let's try to bring in certain new technologies. Let's try to do this and that. Only when we do that can climate change can the impact of climate change be reduced. You know? So thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm glad to be on board. I've learned a lot, and I believe that I'll still be learning a lot from you guys, just like I believe you have learned one or two things from me. Thank you so much, Mr. Ngosta, for the opportunity.
Okay, amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Uh, it was definitely a good idea to have you today on board. Somebody who's working on several projects and several things right there in Zambia. And just before you leave, perhaps let me ask. I wrote down a few questions just to ask you. So, what is, just briefly, perhaps in a few sentences, what kind of work are you doing at the society there at CBU, and how can people be a part of it in case somebody is interested?
All right. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so I am the president for our society at CBU, and it's called the Copperbelt University Natural Resources and Environmental Society. So what we basically do, we are advocates for sustainable use of our environment. We are advocates for effective practices, agricultural practices. What we basically talk about is how people should care more for the environment. How people can try to be effective, and by effective I mean, okay, yes, for example, maybe I receive a certain amount of money. I'll give an example. I receive a certain amount of money every month. How can I continue to buy the things that I do but save more? So now, in the context of the environment, with the little resources we have, how can we use them? We can bring, we should, if we have no other alternatives, we're going to use charcoal. That really cannot be stopped at the moment. But how can we reduce the impact? So our society basically tries to advocate, to educate people. We go to schools, we talk about the different programs, the environmental related programs that we have. here at TBU, we do a lot really. So we are also working on coming up with the climate change and renewable energy club, where we want people to come on board. We want to invite different stakeholders and even the government if possible, and feel like I talked about the dialogue and the partnerships, and see how we as students and young people also can be involved in these activities. So for those interested, you can reach out to Ngosta, you can reach out to me, and I'll be glad to share more information about our activities and our different projects.
Okay, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. And so you've heard it for yourselves. I think Jonathan is going to be with us for a couple more, I don't know, maybe a day or two. Just if you have any questions, you can post them and he's going to be ready to respond on anything. So I know we've kept you for long, but I really want us to do this quiz because I want to get some participation from you as well. So the first question, before we even go to WooClub, who can explain what net metering is? Jonathan talked about net metering. Can I have one person at least in the simplest way possible? What is net metering? If you're able to explain it, you won't have to do this week's assignment. And this week's assignment is going to be very long. So does anyone want to give it a try? What is net metering? He mentioned it just towards the end of his presentation. What is net metering? Anyone? Anyone, gather your thoughts, What is net metering? Guys. What is net metering? Anyone, anything that you remember, even if it's a sentence or two? Benjamin, was that you? What is net metering?
Or maybe I can help try to bring the thought back to everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, so in layman's language, net metering is just a technique whereby people who produce excess power are able to take it back into the grid or sell it and use it at another time.
Okay. So I hope we've got it in very simple words. It's like you produce more power. From how I've understood it, you produce more power, you sell it to ZESCO. When you need power, ZESCO gives you back. Is it something like that, John?
Yes, it is.
Okay, amazing. So that is what net metering is. The last activity of today, don't go just yet. Our last activity today is WooClub. So let's go to WooClub. If you've never used it before, just type on your phone WooClub and enter there. You don't have to log in or do anything. Then you're going to write the code that is showing on the screen, RSHMSQ. And so we've got just a few questions there that we're going to look at, okay? So RS, just go to WooClub on your phone, on your browser, RSH, AIM, RSHM. Let me write this, guys, this for you. RSHMSQ. Everybody can try this one out. I think it's gonna be interesting. So go to WooClub, type WOOCLA, and yeah. Okay. Well, I think what we're going to do, we're going to keep this one. I've seen that the time has really moved a lot. We've already spent more than an hour. So we're going to keep this one for the next time we meet. Again, if we have any questions, don't forget, post them in the group. You can text me personally, whatever questions you have. And for today, I just want to say before we leave, again, once more, thank you to Jonathan. Thank you for sparing your time to be with us. Thank you to everybody who's joined in on time. And thank you to everybody who stayed up to the end. Your assignment is going to be sent. Your assignment for this week is going to be sent. And we're going to continue communicating with you. Otherwise, from me and us at CDEF, it's Happy New Year to you all. I hope you're going to have a blast as we enter into the new year. Goodbye, good night.